Hi, Jessica here. Just a quick note before we begin. This episode came out before Reimagining the Workplace became the ReImagination Café. Same spirit, same heart, just a new name that better reflects how we've evolved. Hello, and welcome to the Reimagining the Workplace podcast. I'm Jessica Cherry. So I am really good at worrying. When I was little, I worried about whether my friends would come to my birthday party, since my birthday's in August, when many people were away. When I got a little bit older, I started riding in equestrian competitions, and I worried about making a mistake in the show ring. In law school, it was the Socratic method that got my head spinning. What if the professor called on me in class and I didn't know the answer? I kept my anxiety at bay by taking control. With an assist from my mom, we started having my birthday parties earlier in the summer so more of my friends could come. I trained harder than others at the barn and therefore made fewer mistakes. And during law school, I studied nonstop so that I never had to utter the dreaded words pass or I don't know in response to a professor's question. But as an adult, maintaining control became harder. Long hours working meant I had to routinely cancel plans. Relationships I thought would never end did. And keeping my head down and working harder than most others around me, it didn't always pay off. And I started to realize that I was missing out on a lot. At a certain point, I was forced to accept the fact that there was very little in either the world at large or my small corner of it that I could actually control. And since the pandemic, I think there's been greater recognition across the globe that certainty and control, they're just illusions, which for many of us is kind of scary. In our workplaces, in addition to change happening at a frenetic pace and uncertainty about what an AI human workplace will ultimately look like, we're together less. There's less human connection. In some cases, making our relationships with our colleagues feel less secure. Suddenly, an email with an okay or a thanks, followed by a period instead of an exclamation point, can actually make us worry that something's wrong. So since uncertainty isn't going anywhere, how can we get better at dealing with it? Is there a way to reduce our anxiety, notwithstanding that we have no idea what's around the bend? My guest today, Gary Hirsch, is more comfortable with uncertainty than anyone I know. He actually revels in it. While Gary is no stranger to fear and anxiety, he discovered at a very young age that art, and especially creating art with other people, can both quell fears and be a tremendous source of joy. And I know this because I first met Gary in elementary school, in kindergarten actually. And we went to elementary school, junior high school, and high school together. And even way back then, he was always doodling, drawing, being creative, and making our classrooms a bit more joyful. Fast forward several decades, and Gary is continuing to make art as a visual artist, and also through a series of what he calls happy accidents, he ended up co-founding a company called On Your Feet, where he applies the techniques of improvisational theater to help teams work together more collaboratively, to reduce fear in order to navigate uncertainty, and ultimately to deliver better results. And he does this in a way that's playful and interactive, that builds connection, and that brings some of that joy that he brought to elementary school into our workplaces. So how does he do it? Let's find out. Gary, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Jessica, this is awesome. I am super excited to talk to you for all sorts of reasons. So thanks for having me.
So Gary, you have always expressed yourself through art, and I know this firsthand because I vividly recall the doodling you did in the margins of your notebooks and elsewhere throughout elementary school. Those unique characters you'd create, I guess I described them as some combination of robot, monster, and maybe amphibian, or I'm sure you have a better description. But can you share, what was the impetus for you first drawing these quirky characters that ultimately led you to a career as an artist?
Such a great question. And by the way, I just love that you have this unique perspective. Like you have known me literally since kindergarten. That's crazy.
And who would have thought all those years ago that we would be here having this conversation today?
I know it's rare to have someone who sort of knows you for that long and you're still in contact with, and you've seen the art evolve, which is so cool. So my work then and now, in some ways, is all about the same thing. I started drawing and doodling these monsters or creatures or characters. I don't really have a name for them, but they all came out of my own fear, actually. And I think to some extent, even now, I'm a much older and potentially more evolved human. It's the same thing. Like when I was young, I had these incredible nightmares, and drawing and art was my outlet. And my father and I had some elaborate rituals, which were pretty amazing, actually, at the time, that allowed me to draw these creatures as a way to respond to these nightmares and to this fear that I had as a kid. And I've used art that way ever since. And I don't think that's really changed. So what would happen would be I would wake up from these vivid dreams. And so there would be these monsters that would break down the door of my bedroom, and they would grab me with a giant hand and swallow me whole. But if that wasn't enough, there was a graveyard inside the monster's belly with other monsters chasing me, like crazy stuff. Quite terrifying. And so I'm 7 or 8 years old here at the time. And I would go into my parents' room. I'd wake up my dad. My dad would be like, nightmares. Okay. He'd pick me up and we'd go down into the kitchen. He'd place me up on a stool, and then he would put my favorite thing in the world into the toaster. We'd make cinnamon toast. And then he would hand me a pencil and paper. And we'd do this night after night. And he would say, why don't you draw these monsters in your dreams? Show me. And so I would draw these monsters, and they would have giant teeth and giant eyes and big claws. And then my dad would help me name them. So he would be like, oh, that looks like a fire demon. So he would write fire demon on it. And the reason I know all of this is because my parents saved my art. So at this time that you knew me, right? We're in elementary school. This is happening. And these drawings were a way for us to do a lot of things together. We were co-creating this experience. My dad would help me create these by naming them. He would pick up the pencil every now and then. And together, we would have this sort of ask for help sessions using art. I didn't know it at the time. I was just like, I'm scared. I want cinnamon toast and my dad. And then one night, something really remarkable happened. And I talk about this in a TED Talk that I do, because I can't believe my dad did this. I still, to this day, find it fascinating. One night, he handed me an eraser instead of a pencil during this ritual. And he said, you know, if you make these monsters, you can also make them go away. And he invited me to start to erase some of my drawings.
Oh, I love that.
And basically, they became more manageable. I mean, directly related, a story sounds good. It's like they disappeared. They didn't disappear. They never have disappeared. I'm just afraid of more sophisticated, or maybe less sophisticated things now as a grown-up. But bottom line is we used art as a way to support, as a way to help, as a way to create community. And that has been, whether I knew it or not, has been my mission with art ever since.
What a lovely memory. And I know that co-creation is a really big theme for you, which we will talk about throughout our conversation. But I do have to say, I think it's so remarkable that so much of the work you do today really has its origins in those late night drawing sessions that you had with your father. So thank you for sharing that personal story. Okay, so over time, many people become increasingly detached from their artistic side, especially if they embark on a corporate career. But you never did. In fact, not only did you continue creating these characters that look remarkably similar to the characters you created when you were 7, by the way, and you became a professional visual artist, but you've also incorporated art into your professional life in various ways, all designed to create and spread more joy in our communities, in our workplaces, and generally in the world. Can you describe for our listeners the various hats that you wear and the role that art plays in the work that you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I think you said an operative word for me, which unifies all this. You talked about the idea of co-creation, and I mentioned that in that first story. So the different hats that I wear live underneath this banner. I am fascinated by what individuals can make when they come together to create something. And that can be an idea. It can be a brainstorm in a company. It can be a new process. It can be a piece of art. It can be on the improv stage when all these dynamics come together. And the way that I've chosen to explore that in my adult life is by wearing, as you say, different hats. So one hat that I wear is as a visual artist. But even with the visual art that I make, I create art that invites participation. And I create art that hopefully invites people to fill in the blanks and co-create it with me sometimes, almost literally, if I'm working on a public mural, for example. So I have a whole avenue where I still keep making and explore visual art and really use it as a way to build community through co-creation, build empathy, build more humanity with people through it. And then I wear another hat where I am the co-founder of a company called On Your Feet. And On Your Feet started about 28 years ago here in Portland, Oregon, by accident, which is no surprise, because it literally is a company that uses the skills, tools, practices, behaviors from an art form that's different than visual art. It's from the art of improvisational theater. And I look at that art form, which I'm a practitioner of and have always been fascinated by and have performed throughout the years. We look at those behaviors and ask the simple question, which is, what can the business world or organizations learn from this art form that they can apply? So we're an applied improvisational consultancy, which who in the world knew that even existed? But it does. It does. And there's a few of us out there in the world doing it. And that art form is an incredibly rich source to explore collaboration, engagement, how people work better together, how you can live your own values. So those are two hats that I wear besides being actually a human being that has to take care of a family and a dog and a house. So hopefully that answers it.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to talk about both your work as a visual artist and the consulting work you do for On Your Feet and how the two intersect. But first, this theme of joy. Why is creating more joy in the world such an important mission for you?
Yeah, that's a deep question. Some of it comes back to that origin story that I shared earlier. I think there is a fear and a feeling of scarcity, and particularly now in the world.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's always there. It's part of our human condition. We are afraid of things. There's so much out in the world that we can't control, kind of everything, actually. But we keep striving to try to. I have suffered from various forms of anxiety throughout my life. And the idea that a piece of art or an experience or a connection can be a little bit of an antidote to that is fascinating to me. I've seen people use these robots that we'll talk about in a moment, these little pieces of art, as a way to shift from being afraid to being more joyful simply by their own interactions with a static object. I have seen people create things with others in an improvisational context, not improv performers, not professionals, just regular, normal, everyday people come together, create more psychological safety with each other, and then co-create something they never thought they could and jump up and down with joy. That to me is making an impact. And honestly, from a selfish place, I kind of want to be in a rocking chair at like 98, 99, that'd be good, with a big smile on my face, because I've been able to at least be a catalyst for people to find more joy in a really scary world. And I feel very deeply about it. And I just keep trying to explore new ways to help people experience it.
It's a wonderful mission, and I have no doubt that is what your legacy will be. And as I said earlier, I do think the growing recognition post-pandemic that maybe certainty and control are just illusions, that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. And I think we are all craving opportunities to just lighten up a bit, to experience more joy. So that's a good segue into the work you do as a visual artist, and specifically the small pieces of art you've been creating for many years, these little robots, or bots as you call them, and your Botjoy initiative. And first, since our listeners can't actually see these bots, can you describe them for us?
Yeah, sure. At their basic level, think about this, because this is all that they really are at their basic level, is a domino. So you know a domino tile, most of the time, those have a number or numbers on one side. And then the other side, sometimes they're just blank. So imagine a blank domino tile, but now on the blank side, in the center of the robot is typically an icon. It could be a heart or a smiley face or a plus sign or an exclamation point. And those signify the type of robot it is. So for example, a love bot might have a heart. or a brave bot has sort of a smiley face on it. And these bots, that's what they are literally. So they're just an object and they come with operating instructions. And I have used them as part of this joy mission to try to spread more joy, support, recognition, acknowledgement throughout the world. And I've invited others to pick up these bots and make them themselves and do the same. So at their basic level, that's what those are.
And I have the operating instructions for my Joy bot here with me. So actually, why don't I read them? So they say, number 1, allow your robot to get to know you by letting him watch you at your desk, kitchen, cubicle, or wherever you spend the most time. Number 2, wait until he notices something great about you, parenthesis, it won't take long, and then listen while he showers you with compliments and accolades. And number 3, share him with your family and friends and create a domino effect, slowly raising the world's self-esteem. And I've actually given bots to friends and family as gifts, and they just bring so much joy to the recipient. I mean, how could they not? So Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this Botjoy initiative started? What was the catalyst for it? And also, why did you decide to use dominoes?
So it started when, again, I combined my worlds, right? So On Your Feet, it's a creative improv consultancy, artwork. About 16, 17 years ago, I created a notebook for my On Your Feet clients. So we're working here in Portland. So for example, I've got lots of clients at Nike. I do a lot of work in Southern California. And I wanted to give them something as a thank you for being engaged with us as a client. So I created this notebook, which basically had a bunch of blank pages in it. But every now and then it had a doodle, one of my drawings, and a prompt. And it was called the Co-Creation Notebook. So it had these little prompts for how to co-create with the world around you. So for example, it had a drawing of someone sitting at a restaurant, and the prompt said, next time you go out to eat, ask your serving staff to order something for you, to find out more about you, and then decide what you should get. So instead of you making the decision, invite someone else in on it and have a co-creative experience. There had a number of those types of prompts in it, but one of the prompts in it had a picture of a robot. And it said, imagine if you had a giant invisible robot that would follow you around all day and give you outrageous compliments. That's all it said. And what happened was I sent this notebook out, it went to hundreds of different clients, and that was the prompt that people came back to me with. They were like, let me tell you what my robot told me today. It said I was really smart in that last meeting, or I was really nice to my sister, or all these different things. I was like, oh my God, people are doing this. People are imagining they have a giant invisible robot that follows them around and gives them compliments. What is that about? I was like, that is weird and amazing. So the next year I decided, let's make the robot. Instead of having it be giant and invisible, let's make something we can give people. And when I was in New York City thinking about this, I was out with my friend that you know well, our good friend Clea from elementary school. We're walking around, it's a co-friend of ours. We're walking around and I'm talking about this project and she's like, let's go to the tile district and find an object for you to make these on. So we went and we found tiles and stones and rocks. We go back to her apartment. Meanwhile, her son, Stanley, who is really young at the time, is sitting next to us while we're pouring all these things out on the carpet. He's playing dominoes. And I'm like, no, the tiles don't work. Nope, I don't like the stones. And Stanley literally throws a domino at me.
Oh my gosh, I love that story.
And you know the characters, Jessica, so it's even better.
Yeah, I can picture it.
And so it was like literally almost like a knock to the head. It's like, dominoes. Now, they feel great in your hand. That's the other short answer to this.
And by the way, I have one in my hand right now.
Yeah, well, tell me, does it feel interesting? It does something, right?
You know, it's funny because I am a pretty anxious person. I have a lot of nervous energy. And for many years, I actually held a binder clip in my hand that I would open and close during conversations, during meetings. But when you do that, they make a clicking sound. And that doesn't really fly when you're recording podcasts.
Right.
And so I had ordered several of these bots from you years ago, some of which I gave away as gifts and some of which I kept. And so I recently decided to start holding on to one of my bots instead of the binder clip. And it's really smooth on one side. And then you've got the texture of the little domino dots on the other side. And the size, it fits really nicely in your palm. And I'm just constantly moving it around in my hand. And then it's super colorful, super quirky. And every time I look at it, it makes me happy.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I just received in the mail, a woman just wrote me, she's had her bot for 8 years. She used it during her cancer recovery. She had worn it down to almost nothing. I mean, literally nothing, small shadow of a mark. And she just sent it back to me and she said, can you please rehab my bot? And my first reaction was, I can just make you a new one. But she was like, no, 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 no.
Oh, she wanted that one. Yeah.
This is my Brave bot. This is the bot that I held on to help me through this journey. And so I just rehabbed her bot and sent it back to her. So, people really do use these, like wear them down.
Yeah, honestly, I was probably intending to give more of them away, but I ended up keeping several of them because I just love them so much. And apparently so do a lot of people, because before too long, these bots were trending, and this was before social media. Can you tell us how that happened? How what started as a little doodle in a notebook you sent to your clients turned into this global art phenomenon?
So there's an idea here. And for me, and this comes from improv. So in improvisation, anything that happens on stage, improvisers think of it as an offer. And they only ask this one question: what can I do with it? So that's what I thought of when this notebook prompt came back to me. People like this. This is working. That's an offer. What can I do with it? So that was why I decided just to explore the heck out of it and just push it. Where can this take me? What can I do with this? So started to make these domino bots. And then I travel a lot in my work. I'm lucky enough to get asked to fly to Europe or go to New York from Portland. And so I would start to leave bots on the street as a way to explore a little bit of spontaneous joy for people. So these bots would have a little QR code on them. Well, not even back then, it wasn't. It was just a URL. And it would be like, this is a joy bot. Take a picture of something that brings you joy and send it to me on this website, then leave it for someone else to find. And these bots would start to make their way around the world. It was crazy. I would get all these, and again, this is low tech times. This is no hashtags yet even. And people are just sending me these pictures. Like, I found this bot and it's a joy bot and my cat brings me joy. So here's a picture of my cat. And I would get these things and it was lovely. And I'd watch bots move around the world kind of in a pay it forward way. And so I started to explore it that way. And then I thought, well, what other bots can I make? So that's where Brave Bots came in. I started to donate those to the different children's hospitals here in Portland. So if you're admitted to Randall or Dornbecker here, you'll get a Brave Bot as a patient to accompany you on your journey in a very scary place, a hospital. And then the stories that would come back from that are just beautiful. Like this girl, Ava, who was diagnosed with diabetes and had to first get her shots and then give herself shots. And she's 13 and she's terrified of needles. She told her child life specialist that I'm not doing any of this without my Brave Bot with me, but when I've got my Brave Bot with me, I can do it. And I can start to learn how to give myself my own injections. And I hear countless stories like that, where these little things, again, just an object, just a piece of plastic, have been endowed with this power, which I believe is simply, it gives you permission to have different conversations with yourself. And I love that the bots can be an amplifier for your own power.
It really is remarkable just how much these bots resonated with people. So much so that at a certain point, you realized you couldn't keep up with the demand, right?
When a children's hospital on the East Coast wants 4,000 Brave Bots to their kids, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do that. That's too many. So I put up on my website on botjoy.com, I put up a video that just said, steal this idea. Here's how you make a bot. Here's how you can think about a bot. How can I support you in it in any way? Then now there's hundreds of people that make them. There's more than I know. I use hashtags to find out. People are like, hashtag Botjoy. And then they're like, look what we're doing in Melbourne. Look what we're doing in Paris. Look what we're doing in Madrid. And it's amazing. And I do not take that for granted at all. I'm just blessed beyond. It's an accident that has turned into a constant source of joy for me.
You know, I think it's often the case that when we put positive energy out into the world, when we spread joy, it often comes back to us in unexpected ways. So what does all of this have to do with the workplace? Here we live in an era where it seems to be all about technology, artificial intelligence. Companies are laser focused on AI. How in the world does Botjoy fit into that? And actually it does. So last year, you were invited to attend Software AG's International User Group Conference in Budapest. So this is a company that is all about technology, digital transformation, AI, and you showed up with a lot of dominoes and a lot of paint, ready to spread some Botjoy. Can you tell us about that and maybe some of your thoughts about why in this age of AI, bringing creativity, art, and joy into our workplaces is so important?
Oh gosh, what a lovely question. So timely. I actually think so. AI is part of it. I actually think in some ways the pandemic is really, to me, the sort of starting point of this, because what happened over the pandemic was everyone got distributed. We suddenly lost that human connection. Yep, we're on Zoom, and man, there's so many advantages of that. I mean, you talk to anybody now who's like, work from home, love it. Work from home, hate it. People have so many different experiences around it. And now you bring in AI, which of course, as it started to emerge, one of the first places it did was within visual art. It's like, just tell AI the image you want, and then it shows up. And there's beautiful and wonderful things about that. I am not one of those persons who is polarized one side or the other around technology. I do believe, however, that there is going to be it's almost like vinyl records to me. When all this technology showed up, people then went back and were like, but there is something about a vinyl record. I can touch it.
Yeah, of course, there's a warmth to it, an authenticity to that crackle sound.
There's a physical thing I do to make it work. I think we're going to see that phenomenon. I'm seeing it already around all sorts of different art forms. So for example, Software AG. This is a company on the cutting edge of AI. They know everything there is to know about it, and they're using it and utilizing it. Then why would they bring in a visual artist to help stimulate and help their users and their people physically make art during a technology conference? The reason they did it, I was the resident artist for this, and I have other examples of this, is because we call it the vinyl record effect, which I've never said before. So there you go. I just said it. But I think that's it. It's because you heard it here first. I think that and I saw it. So for example, you show up and you start having people make things. The first thing they do is like, they're curious and a little bit confused. Why would I do this? What is this here for? I'm not turning on my laptop to learn something. What is that about? Oh, wait, you're another person next to me just as confused. Let's talk about it. Suddenly human connection. Wait, what's that guy doing? Those look cool. Let me get a little bit closer. That's a fun image. What's he making? That's a robot. Robots. Hey, we're into robots for technology. Cool. We can play with that so it's accessible. Then it's like, I want you to make a piece of art. This one guy, he was an engineer, and he's like, I'm not an artist. Suddenly this huge barrier comes up. And I said, you don't have to be an artist. You don't have to do anything, but you could put some marks on the back of a small domino. And so the barrier is really low. And so he makes these bots. And he makes bots, and he starts to think about who in my community could use some help or support or some encouragement or some celebration. And then he makes a thank you bot for the people that are on his staff. And then he makes a bunch more. And then the next thing you know, after an hour goes by, he turns to me and he goes, I guess I'm an artist after all.
What a wonderful revelation for him.
And I'm like, okay, what are we doing here? Preserving some intangibles in this age of technology. We're preserving some humanity, some physical touch, some human connection, some empathy during these processes of making art. And this is just one example.
Well, that sounds like it was a wonderful experience for you. And I love the story, the transformative effect on that person you were talking about. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is that I can't, right? I mean, that happens all the time. I hear that I'm not creative, I'm not an artist. And then all of a sudden you realize you can, and maybe there are some broader implications for that in our lives, right? Like maybe you think there's something else that you don't think you can do, but then maybe this is an inspiring moment to rethink the I can'ts.
I think that's lovely. I agree with you. These are reframe moments.
So let's talk about the other art form you're so passionate about, the art of improvisation or improv. So how did you first become involved in improv? What was it that attracted you to it?
So throughout my development, and I probably even back when you knew me, I really wanted to act. I mean, I was kind of a class clown. I kind of like love attention. Maybe that's no surprise.
Yes, I do. I do recall that.
Right. Like I would kind of get in trouble, but people would laugh. So that was good.
Right.
And so as that kept going, when I was in high school, for example, in our neighborhood where we grew up, I had this moment where I had to choose to either play football or be in the Pajama Game, the high school musical. And they both were at the same time, and there was a conflict. It was my senior year, and I was doing really well as a football player. And I was like, nope, I'm going to be Max the salesman in the Pajama Game because I auditioned for it and got the part.
I watched that show.
Well, there you go. See,
I remember it.
So that was a pivotal moment because I was like, I like this acting thing even more than I like tackling people on the football field. So as I went through college, I auditioned for a lot of plays and I got in them and I got cast. But always my problem was with theater was that I just hated to memorize scripts. Not only hated it, I really was bad at it. It was a huge source of anxiety. And then when I was in grad school, I went back to grad school in our hometown in Cleveland at Case Western to get a degree in art education, but I auditioned for and got into a theater production there. And while I was going to a rehearsal, I stumbled into the wrong rehearsal room. And so I went to go to my rehearsal for Glass Menagerie, except I walked into an improv rehearsal and I'd never seen that before. And I was like, what are these people doing? Oh my God, the audacity to make up stories in theater without a script. Sign me up, because that was my Achilles heel. So I fell in love with it in grad school and it just fit the bill. That was when I was doing a lot of my own physical art too. And I was learning how to be an art teacher. And the co-creative element of improv is remarkable. You know, Jessica, if you and I get up on stage and somebody says dentist, we don't know what is going to happen. It might have something to do with a dentist. It might be about we're archaeologists and we find a dinosaur tooth. Who knows what it's going to stimulate? But together we discover it and then we create a story from it. I am not sure there's a more exhilarating experience on the planet. I find that dynamic of co-creating in that way live without a net to be exhilarating. And that started my journey of just endlessly being fascinated with it.
And the tenets underlying improv, underlying the principle that everything's an offer, being more fully present, letting go of our scripts of what's supposed to happen next, and just going with the flow a bit. We could devote an entire podcast episode to that, actually. But I'm curious, after stumbling into that improv rehearsal, as you started to understand it better and use these improv practices in your own life, what was the greatest lesson for you? And what does it mean to you on a personal level?
You're letting go of your own attention to yourself. You're noticing more. You're letting go of worrying about the future a little bit. And you're working with what shows up. And I think that is such a beautiful human natural state. Nobody's trying to manipulate, plan, control. It gives me hope for everything, honestly. It's a pretty big deal.
For sure. So knowing your story as I do, I know that this was one of many what you call happy accidents that impacted your career trajectory. So you fall in love with improv, but at this point you don't really know what you're going to do with it, how it's going to fit into your life, until you had another sort of unexpected collision. Can you tell us about that?
Something remarkable happened where I was asked to do it in a different context. I was asked to teach a class at the Portland State University MBA program using improv, because the dean at the time, we used to call him the hippie dean, he wanted to do improv and storytelling in an MBA program. And this is back in like 98. And it happened kind of again by accident. Met Scott through a friend.
And Scott's the hippie dean?
Yep. And suddenly these MBA students are taking a class. I was just adjunct. It was kind of on the weekends, but they're taking this class that was abbreviated improv and business communication. And they came to the class thinking they were improving their business communication. What they didn't quite understand is the improv was short for improvisation.
Oh my gosh. That's funny.
So they honestly came in, and no one reads the descriptions, right? I mean, if they did, they would know. Anyways, long story short, suddenly the applications became just remarkable. I was like, wow, you could use this to help people be better presenters, to help their confidence up on stage, to be more engaging. You can help them be better collaborators by learning these different tenets, to generate new ideas by being open and free and adding this dynamic into their brainstorming. The applications just started to snowball.
There's so much synchronicity here. You walking into that improv class by mistake and discovering what would become this lifelong passion. These MBA students walking into what they think is a business communications class and discovering improv. It all has kind of a Harry Potter feel to it. You know, there's a quote I often use that I say to myself when something disappointing happens, when I don't get something that I want. Maybe it's an opportunity that doesn't pan out. And I don't know who to attribute it to, but the quote is, if it doesn't open, it's not your door. And this is kind of the flip side of that. It's like if you accidentally walk through the wrong door, maybe pause and take a look around before turning around and walking out. Because maybe that is your door and you just didn't realize it was there. But I want to go back to some language you used earlier. You referred to this overarching principle that everything's an offer. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So when things are good or bad on an improv stage, for example, if you and I come out on stage together, Jessica, and by accident, you stumble and trip over your shoelace, as long as you're safe, you didn't hurt yourself, improvisers would probably look at that and not judge it. We wouldn't be like, oh, that's too bad it happened. Or we would just go, what can we do with it? And next thing you know, we're doing a scene about the world's clumsiest person or about shoes that automatically tie themselves and why you need one. You just keep asking, what can I do with it? And that is a different outlook on life. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with your doors.
So I didn't really know much about improv before doing research for this conversation. And the thing that has, it's really struck me in a profound way is that improv offers so many insights for living a better life. Not just the stage, not just the workplace, but life in general. That notion that everything is an offer and that whatever happens, if you can kind of reframe it that way, even things that may feel really bad, there's always an offer there. You mentioned an example where someone walks in and falls down, and one of the books I read talks about a clown and the example of the clown who falls down and stands up and takes a bow, like, ta-da, the message being, let's use that in some way. And of course, that example is about using it in the context of comedy and making it funny. But I think particularly when something bad happens, this can be such a valuable tool. There's a great quote that I love. It's an Albert Einstein quote. He says, "In difficulty lies opportunity." And by asking yourself, what's the offer here? It's kind of about finding those opportunities. I just think it's really powerful stuff. So, Gary, at what point did you start applying these improv techniques in the corporate world, creating these interactive experiences for company trainings, conferences, etc., and ultimately forming on your feet?
At the potential of sort of saying happy accident again, I'm going to say it again, because that is what happened. I was selling my work. I made a living as an artist, selling my work basically on the street for years before I started having kids. And this was here in Portland. And I was selling at a craft fair, the Portland Saturday Market, my big figures of monsters on t-shirts. So I'd have these giant shirts with these huge monsters on them, all hand painted. One day I get a request from somebody for a t-shirt. And this is a British guy who lives in Spain and he's from out of town, but he saw my work. And he's like, can I get together to talk with you about a t-shirt that I saw that you make? And I was like, sure, you want to customize something. So we meet at the Three Lions Bakery coffee shop here in Portland, Oregon. And his name is Robert Poynton. And Rob, he worked in the ad world. He was an ad planner and he thought a lot about advertising and the creative process and how consumers are involved. And he was part of a consultancy then called Red Spider. And he said, I'd like you to design a Red Spider t-shirt for me. I'm like, oh, cool, great, I can do that. And in that conversation, he goes, what else do you do? And I said, oh, I'm also an improv performer. And then he asked this operative question, which basically changed the trajectory of my life. He goes, can anyone do that? And my answer was, yeah, anyone can do improv because we already are. Everything you do in life is improvised. It's not scripted. And he goes, yeah, but what about improv performing? Like, yeah, that's teachable. You're not going to be the best improv performer, even funny. But he goes, okay, how about with 90 ad execs in Tempe, Arizona in 3 weeks? And I said, what? He goes, yeah, I'm designing an offsite for this leadership from an ad agency, and this could be a cool component. So he saw that answer as an offer. We reflect on this often because we've now been working together for over 28 years. He saw that as an offer and he just, as improvisers do, he just yes-anded it. He just goes, what about this? And I was like, sure. Now, of course, I said, yeah, we could do that. But in my brain, I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Can I do that, right?
Yeah, but again, you take a leap, you get fit and well, and you take the leap off and you let go a bit. Long story short, we had that engagement with this ad agency and Rob and I decided to start this company. We just did it as a loose network, and he was in Europe and I was in Portland, and other people got involved. And Rob subsequently has gone off to do amazing other things. He's the author of 3 different books, one on improv.
It's a wonderful book.
He and I have never stopped collaborating, and we don't confine it to having to be in a business together. And then On Your Feet in the US really took off. And so now I partner with my lovely partner, Brad Robertson, who he and I now co-own On Your Feet. And we're using improv all over the place, really. The companies that you probably know, Apple, Nike, Google, and also small organizations that are trying to figure out how to be more engaging, how to be more collaborative, more creative.
I've heard you actually refer to the improv stage as a petri dish for studying human behavior, right?
We do think of it that way. What happens on the improv stage literally is like a micro lab of how people work better together, or sometimes don't work better together. When people use ideas and build on them, you can study that in a very safe and playful way and then ask, what can I do with that on my team? So a little lab of the arts, a little lab of theater. It's such a joyful way to experiment, actually.
So let's drill down on how you apply the principles of improv in the business context through your company On Your Feet. So to start out, on the On Your Feet website, you describe your value proposition, and you say that you bring more joy, less fear, and better results to trainings, to teams, to conferences, etc. So how do you do that?
Well, that is such a great question. Most training is a one-way download. Most training is a PowerPoint where people are telling you what to do, giving you a bunch of materials and telling you to go off and do it. And our work is really different. We think deeply about a experience. How do you make something interactive and sticky? How do you create learning through doing? And when you do that in a way that is playful, that allows people to be themselves, you create joy. And by doing that, you also create less fear.
So I'd like to give our listeners a flavor for the different types of work you do. So while we can't go through everything, let's walk through a few of the areas you focus on, and then perhaps you can provide some examples to bring everything to life. So first, I know you do a lot of work on adopting an improv mindset and how you can use that mindset to navigate uncertainty. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Let's face it, everything is unexpected. The thing you thought would happen today probably didn't, and 5 things happened today that you never thought would happen. So how do you deal with that? Improvisers walk towards uncertainty, and they do it in a way that you can learn. They use improv practices to get more comfortable with the unknown, and then they start to navigate it in a way that's actually joyful. So we help people do that.
And of course, one thing, and maybe the only thing really, that is certain in the modern workplace is that you're going to have to deal with uncertainty. So we all need to learn to embrace it. Can you share an example of an activity you've done with a team to navigate uncertainty that illustrates how you use the techniques from improv to make the experience joyful and to quell people's fears?
Oh, sure. We're working with a team of global leaders at a Fortune 100 company. And these are folks within the HR community. And these are folks that are about to instill a brand new HR process throughout this organization. And there is a ton of uncertainty around it. They were like, what happens if this goes wrong? And what if this unexpected things happen? And there was a lot of fear from these leaders as they're about to start to implement this new structure. And we came in to help them try to get more comfortable with this uncertainty. And the way we did it was we had them use storytelling as a way to get there. We had them tell these future stories from heaven and hell, we called them. And not only did we have them just tell those sort of out loud individually, we had them build them together. There's a process where you can start by saying, here's what happened first. And someone steps forward and they say the first thing. And then someone way down the line says, here's how it ended. And then people fill in the blanks in between. Everybody is contributing to this potential story of heaven or story of hell in a playful way. They're sometimes like, no, rewind that. I'm going to go here instead. And they get to mess around a bit with these things that feel really scary and uncertain. And they learn 2 things by doing it. One is when you tell the stories collectively, especially stories from hell, you get these sort of collective sighs of laughter and of relief. It's like, oh yeah, that could happen. But then you get these amazing conversations, which is, well, what if it does? What could we think about? How could we do it? And essentially, can you predict the future and know if it's going to happen? No. But you now feel more supported because you're not sitting there in your own little bubble worrying about it. So we create these playful structures using improv so people can have collective experiences. They don't feel alone and they start to use each other more as a resource.
That's a wonderful example, and it reminds me of something Rob Poynton says in his book, Do Improvise, which you mentioned earlier, that for me speaks to that example. He says, improv doesn't just help you navigate the mess, it's a way to be happily in it. Love that. And what I also like about the example you just gave is that it's also just building connection between everyone who is participating.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so another big issue for companies is how do they make sure they're living their values? And I know you have some creative ways that you focus on that.
The first question we'll ask is, how do we live the values of our organization so they're not just words on a piece of paper? So there's a structure that we stumbled into, and it's around storytelling and values and how story can be such a powerful way for people to explore what they care about.
Can you share an example that illustrates that?
We got a request from a very well-known shoe, not Nike, but a very well-known shoe company that said, look, we've got all these values and we're a heritage brand. People know us, but internally, people don't really understand what we care about. And we've got this language that says we care about our history and our heritage and we care about the consumer, but nobody knows it. They can't recite it, and it doesn't really help them do their work. And it just so happened that they asked us this question: is there anything you guys can do to help us with it? Well, let's think about this. If our thesis is improv can be the answer to lots of things, what could it do here? So here's how we thought about it. If you were a character on stage, let's say you're a baker, Jessica, it's you, you're the baker, and you wanted to communicate to the audience and to the other characters you interact with on stage what your bakery cares about, here's what you wouldn't do. You wouldn't just say, hi, I'm the honest baker. Welcome to the honest bakery. Here's a balloon that says honest on it. Here's a pamphlet that says honest. You wouldn't. You would be able to communicate that you're the honest bakery by saying something on stage like, you know what? You should not buy those muffins. I think they're a little stale. That is different. That is showing versus telling. And what we've discovered was most organizations spend a lot of time and energy, and it's important, coming up with their language so they can show, here's what we care about, here's the values on a piece of paper. But as we got more curious, we discovered actually stories like that one I just described. That was a micro story. You know, don't buy this muffin, it's stale. That's a story. It exemplifies what that bakery cares about.
So let's drill down on that a bit. How you use storytelling to bring companies' values to life. So let's say you've got this balloon or this pamphlet that says, we're the honest bakery, which, as you said, those are just words, nothing else. But when you dig a little bit, you find out about that time when someone said, don't buy those muffins, they're stale. So how do you go about unearthing those stories?
So it's not unusual to have an organization say, we care about customer service or we care about creativity. And that's great. And then sometimes there's some sub-bullets underneath it that are about behavior. So because we care about customer service, we should all be great listeners. And customer always comes first, and we should go the extra mile. Those are cool and inspiring, but they're not sufficient because people still don't really know what to do, and they don't have examples of what's been done. So the way that we think about this is, how can you use story as a way to create more meaning behind this language? And as we got curious about this and started to dig into organizations that we worked with, we discovered that there's different types of stories out there. There's stories of fact. And stories of fact are examples of the thing you say you care about. So if there is great customer service, telling a story exemplifies what we mean by excellent customer service.
So can you share one that stands out to you, a story of fact you uncovered through your work that revealed a company's values?
Sure. You're working with a delivery company, a company that specializes in delivering packages, et cetera, overnight express. And we were working with a group of their VPs. We're in a large auditorium of about, 150 or so folks. And we're talking about the values. And we said to them, so what are your values? And no problem. Hands go up. They can all recite them. Excellent customer service, being on time, everything else. And they're like, yeah, we got these. They're very proud that they know their values. And then we asked this question, great, can you tell me a story of one of them? And there was dead silence for an awkward moment. And then this woman in the back stands up, and she's pretty far away. And she stands up, she goes, I got a story. And she tells us this story, which I found to be a beautiful example. She says, I work in the Rocky Mountain region. And one day we got a call from an author who lived halfway up a mountain that he needed his manuscript to be in New York the next day. One of our drivers need to go up and get it. It's typically what we do, no problem. Excellent customer service. So this driver drives up to this cabin in the Rocky Mountains, and a snowstorm hits pretty suddenly. And the truck is stuck. It cannot get that manuscript down from the cabin to the depot to get to New York. And again, she's telling this story in a group of her peers. And so she says, so what the truck driver did was he turned to the author and said, what size shoes do you wear? And the author said 9.5. The truck driver says, well, I'm a 10, but do you have any skis? And the author says, I do, but they're going to be a size too small. He goes, I don't care. And this driver gets his 10s into a 9.5s, gets the skis on, grabs the manuscript, and does a cross country for about 4.5 to 5 miles to the depot. And that manuscript gets to New York on time.
That is hands down the greatest example of great customer service that I have ever heard.
And again, this is being told in a large audience. And what happened in the audience was the most telling. Beautiful story. Great example of excellent customer service. Story of fact. But the most incredible thing that happened was there was this other dead air silence. And then someone on the other side of the auditorium says, we did that. And that was what really unlocked it. Because yes, if one steward of the brand does that, you all do it. That's a story you can now take, you can share.
That's such a great point, that that's now everyone's story to share. But so now what about the flip side? What about the stories that are not flattering? Stories that show maybe we're not who we say we are. Do you ever uncover those?
We have people tell stories of contradiction. A story of contradiction is so important to tell. It's just hard to tell. So what are the stories that actually show the opposite, that sometimes you actually contradict the value you care about? We were doing this once with an NBA team with the front office there, and they said they cared a lot about connecting with the community. But as we got more curious and had them tell more stories in a safe space, in small groups, working with the entire organization, we heard some stories like, well, we care about connecting with the community, but only when we're doing well, because we don't want to go out into the fans during a home game and have them tear us apart because our team is so lousy. Well, that's a story of contradiction. You can't just connect when things are going well. What happens with story of contradiction in organizations is nobody talks about them. Right. And if you don't talk about them, you can't learn from them. So that's what these workshops do. They create a safe space to look at that stuff and then ask, cool, what can we do about it?
Right. There's a lot of opportunity there. But first, you have to be willing to be honest with yourself, to acknowledge those contradictions. So important.
And then there's one other type of story, which to me is the most interesting, which is stories of possibility. So if you say you care about excellent customer service, what aren't you doing that you could be doing to exemplify that value even more? Where's all the white space? That's where innovation comes in. That's where we use incredibly cool experiences where you actually go away from your own self and ask a question like, well, what would a scuba diver instructor do if they cared about excellent customer service? And then you examine that and go, well, how could we do some of that? You're not a scuba diver shop. You might just be a bakery. But what could you do that they do that applies? So there's all sorts of ideation techniques that you can use to get these stories of possibility in moving in action. And then imagine this, you do these in small workshops, new stories come up, those stories get submitted to leadership, leadership implements some of those. Suddenly you, as somebody maybe not so high up in the organization, your idea, if you've got receptive leadership, suddenly comes to life because the entire organization agrees we care about this thing.
Right, great for the organization, and the people who share those stories feel heard, which can potentially increase their connection, their engagement with the company.
Here's a real solid example of that. There were baggage handlers at a major airline. This is years ago before people thought about this more. And these baggage handlers noticed that this seems obvious. The bags that go in first come out last, right?
Right.
So they said, look, we say we care so much about excellent service. Let's put the first class bags, because those people are paying more. Let's put them in last.
Right.
Because they'll come out first. And again, it seems totally obvious to us now, but that's a story of possibility because that company wasn't doing that before then. They listened to their baggage handlers. They switched the policy. It became a story of fact, but it started as a story of possibility.
Right. And I want to highlight something you said that I think is so important, which is that leadership must be receptive to these stories of possibility. And that's regardless of where within the organization they come from. Because if they're not only can a potentially great idea die on the vine, but also I can easily envision a scenario where a story of possibility becomes a story of contradiction.
Absolutely.
Gary, I could listen to these stories all day. Each so powerful, so engaging, and each a great illustration of what a company's values really are. So let's turn to, and this permeates everything you do really, But can you tell us about the work you do where you really zone in very intentionally on team building and collaboration?
We think a lot about how people behave when they get together to collaborate. We use improv as a base team building essential. If you want to make things with other people, you want to be a better collaborator, you can create more joy using improv as that methodology. And people leave with high trust. They leave with agreements for how to behave with each other. And they leave deeply knowing each other in a way they wouldn't have if they hadn't been that vulnerable.
So let's unpack that a bit. Because team dynamics, becoming better collaborators, creating an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their stories, sharing their ideas, even ideas that are not fully formed, is of course so important for creativity and innovation. So one concept that many people may be familiar with is this concept of yes and, which is sometimes misunderstood and often depicted as just always agreeing with everything. And it's even been spoofed on Saturday Night Live and elsewhere. But yes and is, of course, much more nuanced than that. And it's really about having conversations where you build on people's ideas rather than shutting them down. And I've heard you refer to a similar, but perhaps a little broader concept, which is this idea of accepting versus blocking offers. Can you explain what that means and the impact of accepting or blocking offers, the impact that that can have on a company's culture?
So when you accept an offer, it means you recognize it and do something with it. The example that I will often use will be if I'm on stage and an audience member sneezes. Typically what happens is a performer doesn't do anything with it. That's a sneeze. It's part of the deal. They don't recognize it. They don't do anything with it. They ignore it. That is blocking. They don't use it. If I'm up on stage and someone sneezes and I go Gesundheit, or I pull out a handkerchief, or I run out into the audience and make sure they're okay, or I put on a mask, all of things, there's millions of ways to accept an offer. It's a generative state. It's why improvisers go there. As soon as you recognize something, there's millions of things you could do with it. I could say, evacuate the building. Someone sneezed, right? So when you accept an offer, it creates possibility. When you block an offer, sometimes ignoring it, sometimes denying it, sometimes contradicting it, it shuts down possibility. Those are the high level definitions of the two. Both are useful. The thing that gets clouded is everybody thinks that blocking is always unhelpful and you should always yes and everything. But if you yes anded everything, you'd be dead. Because you're like, oh, look, beautiful flowers, I'll just cross this busy highway. You need to block the highway. You need to go, I am not going to accept the offer of crossing over, because if I do, I'll get hit by a bus. So both are useful. However, if you want to create a generative culture, you need to accept more than you block.
So let's turn to how we can use these concepts to help teams innovate. So in today's workplace, people have to come up with ideas really quickly. And I think there's an acknowledgement that we have to feel safe enough to throw out sort of half-baked ideas and then have people add on to them. And then eventually you may come up with something great. But a lot of potentially great ideas never see the light of day because people are either too afraid to share them in the first place, or maybe they're shut down prematurely. Having yes and conversations and doing more accepting than blocking, these sound like valuable strategies for creating an environment where people feel comfortable enough to throw out ideas that may be a little rough, but have a lot of potential if people build on them. An environment that encourages what we might call idea co-creation.
Absolutely spot on, because in the end, it's about vulnerability. If you want great ideas, if you want to steer this boat towards innovation, there are some behavioral requirements that you must create or you will not get there. And one of those is you have to feel safe enough to be vulnerable enough to put your ideas out into the world to begin with. If they stay in your head and you never say them, nobody can do anything with them. And you're right, it's gone. Then you have to be able to socialize those ideas in a way that has at least some what we would call fit and wellness to it. It can't be like, here's a bad idea, you probably won't like it. You got to be like, here's something I'm sort of excited about. I don't know if it's going to work. I like to share it. That's a fit and well mindset around your work. You need that. People do not want to engage with someone who is not feeling fit and well. They don't have to know it's going to work. This would be perfect. but you have to believe in the potential. And then there is this beautiful collision that can occur if you create the right conditions where people feel safe enough to take, as you say, a half-baked idea needs another half-baked idea to create a full-blown baked idea. 2 and 2 could equal 90 under the right conditions. Collisions are where the magic is.
Collisions are where the magic is. That's great language and so true. Another thing that comes to mind for me when thinking about yes and accepting and blocking and why these techniques can be so valuable in the workplace is in the context of having difficult conversations. There are a lot of topics that people are afraid of today, so they kind of shut down. They don't engage. For example, in the DE&I space, an area where it's probably never been more important for us to engage with each other. But people don't want to offend. They're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. They're afraid they'll be canceled. So they sit back on the sidelines because they feel safer there. Or another one, giving someone constructive feedback. People so often avoid those conversations because they're uncomfortable. But then important issues never get addressed. Can yes and, or this notion of accepting rather than blocking, can they be used as tools to help us engage in some of those conversations where emotions can run really high? And just like on the improv stage, you can't predict what the other person will say.
Mm. Yeah, as first of all, thank you for asking that question. We see this a lot. There's a lot of fear out in the workplace on all sorts of different issues. And here's the way I like to think about this. I actually think the entire dynamic of accepting and blocking and examining that, it's all about flow. So there's a fundamental question one needs to ask, which is, do I want to have flow in the relationships that I have here? Do I want an exchange, a back and forth? Do I want to understand where that person is coming from and then be able to share where I am coming from so that we can move forward together? There is a moment where you have to ask that question, because if the answer is no, no techniques are going to help. If the answer is yes, then I do think examining relationships through blocking and accepting of offers is really helpful. So if somebody is afraid to say something, afraid to make the initial offer, that is a hard thing to overcome.
So can you give an example of a situation where that might happen?
We do a lot of feedback training. How do you give tough feedback to somebody you like? You have to start by making the offer. So here's something I noticed, and I'm curious how this shows up for you. Suddenly an offer is launched out into the world. That person has a choice, and you can't control it. They're either going to accept the offer, meaning recognize that question and answer it, or they're going to block it. Look, I don't want to talk about that right now. But you can at least look at where you are either blocking or accepting the offer. If you want to have a difficult conversation, there is a baseline of willingness to want flow with the other person.
Right.
Once that happens, you can use yes and as a way to recognize and create more flow. You don't have to agree with someone to build on their idea, but you have to recognize their idea to be able to build on it.
Right.
So that's how we use it.
You know, I've never heard anyone refer to it that way, the idea of creating flow in our conversations, but it really makes perfect sense. We've all had those conversations where you get into a groove with someone, ideas are flowing, no one's interrupting, no one's blocking, you're colliding ideas, you're co-creating. Feels really good and so important for innovation. Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground, so I just want to take a step back and recap for a moment. So, Gary, you've shared examples of how you use improv to help organizations navigate uncertainty by adopting that improv mindset, getting comfortable in the mess, how you use storytelling as a way to uncover values, and how you can use tools such as accepting versus blocking offers to help teams build better relationships and collaborate more effectively. And I know that there are a host of other things you do, helping people to get more comfortable delivering presentations. There's a lot of fear there, but helping them to find the joy in it and really focus on serving their audience. So while we can't get to everything, what is so clear is that there is so much that these improv tools can teach us. There are really endless possibilities. And if you look on the On Your Feet website, Gary will have an opportunity to share that in just a minute. The joy that people are experiencing while they're co-creating with their colleagues, while they're learning, it is just so apparent. So I would encourage anyone listening to take a look. So Gary, we need to start winding down. But before we do, I have something that I want to say to you, and that is this. You have such an interesting career and life story, and of course, it's still evolving. You have a lot to do before you're sitting in that rocking chair at 98, 99, reflecting on it all. But having known you when you were 7, when you were drawing those monsters for the first time, first of all, it's been really interesting for me now, all these years later, to understand the backstory of where those monsters came from. But also, I can't let you go without telling you how remarkable it is to me to see how you never strayed from who you are, from what came naturally to you. And when all of these opportunities presented themselves, you always said yes. There's a Keith Johnstone quote that you have shared with me and that you often share, and I know it's meaningful to you. He says there are people who prefer to say yes and people who prefer to say no. Those who say yes are rewarded by the adventures they have. Those who say no are rewarded by the safety they attain. And you have accepted so many offers and have been rewarded with so many adventures during which you have spread so much joy. And that is rare and that is brave. So I think that you are a wonderful ambassador for art, for improv, because it's not just what you do, it is who you are, it is your essence.
That is the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me. Thank you. I mean, if that's what this whole story ends up being, and it ends up being aligned and authentic, then phenomenal.
So on that note, Gary, we're just about out of time. But before I let you go, are there any resources you'd like to tell our listeners about? And how can people find out more about everything we've talked about today?
Sure. I mean, I'd be remiss not to direct people towards the On Your Feet website. I'm sure if my business partner is listening, he's going to you better do that. So I'm going to. You should go to oyf.com. There's a ton of resources about how we use improv to help people in their presentations and their meetings, conferences, trainings. There's a lot of open source stuff there. So it's worth going to, even if you never hire us. If you want to learn more about the art and the Botjoy project, how you can get involved, how you can start making bots and spreading joy throughout the world too, you can go to botjoy.com. There's a video there that says, steal this idea, and tells you all about how to do it. And then if you're like me and like to read every now and then, 3 books. One is by a person I started On Your Feet with, dear friend, colleague, brilliant human being, Robert Poynton. We worked on a book together called Everything's an Offer. That one's hard to find these days, but you can find Do Improvise, which is a small, beautifully written, easy to understand book about the application of improv in life and work. And then there's 2 books by a seminal, I'll call him guru in the improv world, Keith Johnstone. You quoted him, and Keith really is the founding human around this work in a lot of ways. And he wrote Impro, and then another follow-up called Impro for Storytellers. You do not have to be an improv performer or give a damn about performing improv to get a huge amount from both those books.
Terrific. Gary, I can't thank you enough. You have shared so much valuable information for our listeners about how we can create more joy and less fear in our workplaces. And of course, for me, it's been so much fun connecting with you today.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Jessica. That was really fun.
That's it for this episode of Reimagining the Workplace. I'm Jessica Cherry. Thank you so much for listening.